then I am going to actually ask Joan to start us out here. Any of you Texas A&M fans here? Any of you in the room? Okay, Joan, can you tell us what we do?
So we have some Aggies in the crowd, and we also have, we understand we have visitors from all over the country, right? So everybody needs to wake up. I understand a lot of us had a good time last night. So in the tradition of Texas A&M, I'm just gonna shout out a common greeting, and you just say it back to me, okay? So howdy, everybody.
Howdy.
Very good, so we're awake now. Welcome, welcome to Texas, and howdy.
I think we needed that after some two-stepping at Billy Bob's last night, right, to get us going this morning. So our first panelist here is actually Joan. I've known Joan, I don't know, maybe like 7 or 8 years now, right?
Something like that, yeah.
She's the managing partner of AGX, an organization that empowers community leaders and entrepreneurs with the strategies to make the difference they want to see in their communities. Joan specializes in supporting small and medium-sized communities, some large too, I've seen, and businesses that are seeking to grow and contribute to a strong economy in Texas and throughout the world. I've even seen you do this in Guatemala. And your husband, Jose, was just telling me, in Africa?
Yeah, done some things around
amazing. Our second panelist is Wendy Burton, Chief Philanthropic Officer at the Community Foundations of Texas, focusing her efforts on post-COVID-19 relief efforts through North Texas Cares, as well as CFT's Working Families Success Model and achieving the economic success of working families. I love hearing this because honestly, with what we've seen going on in Ukraine and all the support people are sending down after Hurricane Ian in Florida, it's groups like this coming together and doing it from the ground up that's needed. Wendy is also a member of the Community Economic Advisory Committee for the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, is the board of the Irving Family YMCA, and is on the executive committee of the North Texas Asset Funders Network. We also have with us Tiffany Parent, overseeing child and family well-being at the wonderful Stand Together Foundation, an organization that partners with entrepreneurs to drive transformation within communities. I love this word, community, such a part of why we're here. Tiffany's efforts focus on reform of the child welfare system devoted to putting children and families on the quickest path of healing and well-being. Prior to Stand Together, Tiffany was the Accelerator Chief and Zoma Fellow at the Tennyson Center for Children in Denver, Colorado. Prior to Tennyson, during her time in DC, Tiffany's federal policy acumen led her to leadership positions with CLASP, the Pew Charitable Trust, and as a consultant at the Federal Children's Bureau. Thank you. Our fourth panelist is BJ Gergen, Global Head of the Philanthropy Center at JP Morgan Trust, where she specializes in helping clients increase their philanthropic impact and meet their charitable goals. Prior to joining JP Morgan, BJ spent 15 years in the nonprofit and government sectors, focused on public policy, nonprofit law, and family governance. BJ serves as the executive director of the Radler Foundation, focusing on vulnerable communities in the U.S. and East Africa. I need to get you together with Magat Wade, who's here and runs the Africa Center. She also worked at the National Math and Science Initiative, the U.S. Department of State, and also the White House. My goodness, some pretty impressive women up here. Wendy first, Community Foundations of Texas. This is impressive. Started in 1953 with $10,000. Recently, you hit $2 billion in grants. How has the giving focus of the foundation evolved over the last decade? And how have you become more entrepreneurial?
So if you're not, we are a community foundation. If you're not familiar with what a community foundation is, we are a nonprofit foundation like any other. Started in the probably late 1950s. Our model was formed by the IRS when the government decided to set up a different kind of foundation that allows donors to set up accounts. So they make a gift to us, a charitable gift. They then can recommend where their grant giving goes. And then we manage their investments for them, and they get the charitable deduction. So yes, Communities Foundation, we've been in Dallas since 1953. We were started with an original gift by a woman named Pearl C. Anderson. She was an African-American entrepreneur who was supporting her community and saw a need and decided to set up the very first gift at CFT that went to support basically social services. And so we're incredibly grateful for Pearl Anderson. and her gift. So from that original $10,000 gift over 60 plus years ago, in the last 10 years, we've broken over $2 billion in giving. We right now hold a little, thank you. Yeah, it's a big milestone. I would say how we've changed in the last decade, and for sure, is that we certainly have been looking to try to be a lot more responsive and proactive with understanding what the needs are in the community. So one of the things that we did in the last couple of years that I'm incredibly proud of is we pivoted with about 60 different foundations in town and across all of North Texas when the pandemic hit. So March 17th, I got a phone call from a bunch of foundations saying, oh my God, what's going to happen? Clay Jenkins, who's our county commissioner, says we're going to close. What are we going to do? The nonprofits are freaking out. We had a call on a Friday. That was a Tuesday. We had a call on a Friday. We had about 96 different foundations, including corporate foundations, who got together. By Monday, we had launched a website and a shared application, which meant that all the nonprofits had to do was fill out one application, and 60 foundations saw it at the same time. They didn't have to apply 60 places. They applied once. We all shared the application. We all agreed that we would tell who we funded, and everyone would fund their own way. So basically, all the applications went in a big pool. You would pull them out. People would decide what we were going to fund. And we managed in about 9 months to put out about $60 million all across North Texas in about 9 different counties, as far as the Red River, into Grayson County, into rural communities, into low-income communities. And the reason why we did this is because we wanted to make sure that giving was spread out across the entire community and not just going to one or two of the big fundraisers. Those who have money and have marketing, we're going to be okay. It's the small ones, especially those down in communities where they are under-resourced, that don't have big marketing and don't have a reach. We wanted to make sure that they had the chance to get funding. The other thing that we're really trying to do is engage our funders in a lot more of an aggressive way, where we're reaching out to them and taking things to them that we think are really kind of cutting edge and leading edge, and offering them an opportunity to come alongside us and and partner with us on things that we feel like are really innovative. Any grant making is a risk. It's an investment, so it might work. It might not work. But we feel like if there's some really cool and interesting ideas, some pilots, some ways that you really try to engage in a new and different way, I think of our folks at Stand Up who do some amazing work and Stand Together. So, I think we're trying to really get as creative as we can. And what we're finding is that our fellow funders come alongside us, our funding partners come alongside us, our corporate partners, and then finally, I think our fund holders will also come alongside us and invest in the things that we think are really fantastic.
So because of your organization and many others in the state, a lot of communities and organizations that might not have stayed afloat and had been helping vulnerable communities.
Stayed afloat, kept going. I mean, it was really phenomenal. One of the things that we did is, because we were all sharing, we met, it was kind of fun. So if you've ever worked with any foundations, we're a little bit like cat herding. We don't do things fast, and we kind of do things at our own pace. So getting a group of funders, so we had a weekly video Zoom call for about 3 months that had about 96 people on a Zoom call, 96. And we talked about what we were funding and who was up and where we were at. We had 3 or 4 of us foundations that read the applications, because a lot of the foundations don't have a lot of staff. We received over 3,000 applications. So that was where the need was. And so we were, as fast as we were reading them, we were putting them on, we were so sophisticated, a Google spreadsheet. And the rules were, if you wanted in, you had to give us your logo so we could put it on the website. You had to promise to fund something. You had to swear you wouldn't share the Google spreadsheet with anybody who was a nonprofit. And you had to tell us who you funded. And that was the only rules that you had to play. And so we got together and we would talk about, did anyone read this application? Did anyone see this? Who's going to fund it? And so what we were able to do is, because we could see who all was being funded, and we could there was like a countdown of how much, like if you wanted 10 million and we could see you've gotten 5 and there was 5 left. We could also see who hadn't gotten funded, and those of us who had the ability to be a little more nimble with our grant making could say, all right, we're going to fund these small ones and make sure they get funded, so that we're not just funding 1 or 2 really big agencies, but we're really making sure that our funding is going. And then we even looked and said, which geographic region hasn't gotten any money yet? And we would take it back to the group, and people would then pull those off and then fund those. Just because we felt like during COVID, and we changed the grant making in that everyone also agreed that all the grants were general operating, which meant the nonprofit could use it for whatever they wanted. We know that when we're doing grant making, sometimes as funders, we'd like to specify it for a specific program, a specific outcome, but we felt like there are times when you have to throw those rules out. And you have to say, you know what, we got to do this differently because we need to be responsive to this very unique time in our lives and in our community. And so everyone agreed, which is crazy because some of the bigger family foundations that you all know, they don't do that. And they went to their boards, and we all got permission to basically just throw these out. It was a sign of trust too, because as funders, we don't always trust each other, or we do, but we kind of have our own processes. And to have other funders saying to me, if your team has read it and thinks it's good enough for us. And that was an extraordinary moment. And what's been really great after we've got done with that, we did 2 rounds in 2021 through 2021. That collaboration among us as funders has continued. And so we're engaging in a lot more, I think, kind of entrepreneurial, exciting things across North Texas with a group of funders to try to really get around some big ideas. We've been meeting on housing, on homelessness, and some other big issues.
Well, thank you. It is wonderful to hear, as a philanthropic advisor myself, how much the people you work with trust and value you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's trust you have to earn and you have to maintain.
Thank you. Joan, I'm going to talk to you next. Joan's done something pretty similar with the town of Bryan, Texas, which I've only been to once since she and her husband, Jose, they turned it around, right?
Well, we had a hand in it. We had a hand in turning downtown Bryan. So historic downtown communities are all across Texas, for sure, all across the country. There's a significant movement to reinvest and revitalize our historic downtowns, largely because they're unique assets that can't be repeated, right? Once you tear down a historic building, you don't get it back. The character of the place, Fort Worth has wonderful examples of this sort of thing. It's something that you can't really recreate. Disney might be good at it, right? But you still know when you're at Disney that you're in a place that's been recreated, right? But when you go to a historic downtown, you have these assets that really aren't replicable. They're unique to the place. They have inherent in the walls, even sort of seeping from them, their culture, their history. All of that is a really unique asset that you have to work with. And the work that we have done with AdventGX, AGX as we like to call it, in downtown Bryan was really us taking that next step, going ahead and taking the risk as a company and as a couple to invest in our historic downtown in the manner that we had been advising communities across the country to do so. So you might say we were walking the talk. So we had been developing strategies around using the resources that are available to you with communities, helping them to listen to the voice of the customer and find their best developmental opportunities, that's what we call BDOs, in order to, like I said, use the assets they have to create a vital community, a place that's thriving. And as we went around the country doing that, we looked in our own backyard, and historic downtown Bryan had a lot of things that were going really well. The city itself had invested in the infrastructure, literally from the ground up, so that they had laid that groundwork for entrepreneurs to come behind and to take dilapidated buildings and to do innovative things and to take the risk and to make thriving community happen through live music venues, art galleries, events venues. And so we decided to do that. We also focus on the innovation side and working with entrepreneurs, and we have a business incubator. So all of those some of the elements, not all, but some of the elements that we would really encourage communities to incorporate in a strategy for economic development or entrepreneurs to incorporate into their strategy for building up a business, we decided to put to work in historic downtown Bryan. And so in doing that, we have to mitigate risk, just like a philanthropy does when they're making investments. They're investing, we're investing. We mitigate risk by putting together a strategy and by bringing the customer and the stakeholders from the very beginning when we lay out a plan. So when we work on a strategy development process, we will bring potential funders to the table from the get-go. We'll bring the potential customer to the table. And we have that vision together. We create that vision together so that when it's time to execute, they already own it. So it's a unique process that we use to mitigate risk, to engage philanthropy, to engage the community itself, who end up being the customers, and the other stakeholders who are involved. And it's been really exciting. I think we've been actively working in historic downtown Bryan for about 12 years now. We have multiple businesses there, but the thing that's become the most valuable for us as consultants is we bring people from around the world to historic downtown Bryan so that they can see the possibilities. Oftentimes, the biggest barrier to being able to go from where you are to where you want to be is being able to see past all of the barriers, to imagine the possibilities. And we're very, very fortunate that in historic downtown Bryan, Texas, we have so many things that have flourished, right? We have so many businesses that have taken off, they're working, and so we can bring community members, leaders, would-be entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, even philanthropists, our partners from across the free market community, to come and see what you can do if you get focused and you find your best developmental opportunities and move forward.
Well, I have a quick question, because you and I spoke a little about this yesterday. We talked about it's not just giving back always financially, it's sometimes doing, right?
Sure.
We talked about sometimes it's cleaning up a park, or how did you get people involved from the ground up in Bryan, Texas?
So again, we go back to it's not our business, it's their business. It's the community, like especially if you're going to have an event venue or a live music venue or at a gallery. All of these things belong to the community. We're doing it for them. And so engaging volunteers from the very beginning, either in a community engagement effort or inviting them out to be mentors to other entrepreneurs, or inviting them to counsel the students that we have involved in a Seed Academy, which is a science, engineering, art, and design camp that we do. We engage people to volunteer, to lend their time and their talents, and often to donate funds, right? To support the things that we want to do on the ground in the community. It can look a lot of different ways. I think the key really is to engage your network first. And that's a big part of what Policy Circle's advocating, right? And us as well. You have to build up the social capital so that when you have a need, you can call the right person and they are excited because you see in them what it is that they can offer to whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, whether that's in the arts or economics or parks or what have you. So I think just having that social capital, that network, if you will, to call upon, and then really calling people's talents out and affording them the opportunity to get involved is really fun and actually pretty essential to success.
Thank you. I think we have all learned a lot about what we can do in our own communities here from Joan. Then, BJ, you lead the J.P. Morgan Philanthropy Center's efforts globally. How do you help philanthropists increase their impact and meet their goals?
So one of the things that my team does, and I would encourage you to do this as well, is we always start by asking people what is the end goal that they have in mind. And if you look at giving data, giving is actually pretty predictable. It's about 2% of US GDP every year. Giving USA puts out a report. They look at every 990 that's filed by every charitable organization in the country. And the majority of people in the US give to two areas. They give to faith, so their institution that they attend, and they give to education. And it's generally a private school or an alma mater. And so that's where most people give. If you broaden that circle out a little bit more, people give locally. They give to organizations they know, they give to organizations that are coming to them. So when you're thinking about being proactive in your giving, and you're thinking about your time, and you're thinking about your community, and you're thinking about your resources and your talents and what you have to offer, there's not a lot of room left. And so we encourage people to think about, with that small margin that you have, you're gonna do those things. You're gonna give to whatever area of worship you give. You're gonna give to your education for your children and for yourself. But what brings you life? And so we really ask people to start there. And it's also important to think about, is it something that's important to you individually, or is your giving important to your family? Is it important to your legacy? Is it important to your children and your grandchildren? And I'll just give you sort of a tangible example. My own sort of family, when my husband and I got married about 5 years ago, we give to very different things. I grew up in international development. I give to refugees overseas. Very little of what I've done has ever been in my own backyard. He's really been involved with UCLA rugby. He grew up in sort of the culture of young men coming together and having community and building character, and has been sort of the reason why that rugby club still exists today. Very different areas. That was fine for us until we had kids. And then once we had kids, we said, well, we want to contribute values to our children, and we want our children to be able to do something with their time and not just their dollars. So we started looking at organizations that we could get involved in our own community, where we could bring our kids along on the journey and where they could sort of learn and give. And so I think it's important to think about what stage of life you're in your giving, and what you're going to give, whether it's your time, whether it's your talent, and whether it's your dollars.
I want to remember that. What brings you life? Like, what brings you joy? That's really important. I wrote that down for myself.
I think also, one of the things I see people doing is too much. So we see people be really dissatisfied when they're trying to do everything. And I think if you can take a little bit of time to take a step back and decide what your priorities are, you're going to have a lot more satisfaction. The other one thing that we talk to our clients about that I would encourage all of you to think about is to do a bit of an audit at the end of the year. It could just be an hour on New Year's Day or an hour during the holidays of, what did we do this year? Is it what we want to do next year? Is there something else I want to do? I don't know about you. I serve on a lot of boards. We all serve on a lot of boards. It's okay to say, do I still want to do that? Or are there other things I want to get involved in? Sometimes saying no to one thing gives you the space in the room to say yes to something else.
I actually have a husband that sets up a yearly plan for us and every activity in our life. At first I was like, what? We have to do this? But I actually look forward to it.
Yeah.
Tiffany, your focus is dear and near to my heart as a mom of 4 children. Your focus is on family and children. Can you share how Stand Together takes a bottom-up approach to philanthropy?
I would love to, and I'm delighted to be here. This is just, you all are amazing. This is an amazing panel, and being in this room of leaders in Fort Worth is just such an opportunity, so thank you all for that. And I get to talk about things that I care most about, empowering kids and families and communities, and how philanthropy can help drive that. So as my colleagues in the room know, other than my own kids, this is one of the things I get most jazzed to talk about. But at Stand Together, we're all about principles, right? So we've seen that formulaic, kind of one-size-fits-all responses just don't work. And so we've found that consistently applying a range of principles across a whole host of different issues consistently gets better results, whether we're talking about criminal justice, as my colleague Vikrant did yesterday, healthcare, education, you name it. We don't have time today to go through all of the principles, but if you want to reach out to me, I'd love to talk about them. But I wanted to just talk about a few as we're thinking about disruptive philanthropy, bottom up, and kids and families. So at the core of everything we do, it's really about believing in people. And that sounds really simple, but it's about this notion of believing in parents, right? And acknowledging that parenting is hard, right? Even in the best of circumstances. The lights make it a little hard to see, but I think I'm getting some affirmative nods out there that it's hard, right? Believing in people also means believing in kids and families. And so in our giving, we're really thoughtful about partnering with those organizations that are seeking to empower kids, families, and communities. So that looks like organizations that aren't just looking and measuring success by units of service, not just growing their organization, but really looking at metrics like customer satisfaction, if you will, or well-being, or transformative relationships, right? Speaking of relationships, we're thoughtful about brokering, and I feel like I hear this theme across you all as well, relationships that keep us humble and learning, right? I don't know about you all, but the Zoom conversations, right, and just the business of doing work, you can get disconnected from the reality of what's happening in communities and on the ground. So we're intentional about maintaining those relationships. And then to your question, Stephanie, about bottom up, that's very much related to our belief in people. It looks like the reality that when there are challenges, those folks that are closest to those are best positioned to address and find the solutions. So I spent the early part of my career in DC, and I know that there's tons of tables, right, where experts are coming together trying to devise solutions for communities across the country for some of our biggest social problems, right? Now, I've also spent the last 8 years in Colorado, deeply involved with community building efforts. And I can tell you that the folks in DC don't know what's happening in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. The solutions that they would devise probably wouldn't work. Same for Grand Junction, same for Eastern Plains. As you all think about your home states, I imagine you're thinking of towns and regions too, right? So at Stand Together, we are really intentional about listening to families, communities, hearing what the barriers are, understanding what it would take to drive solutions, and then partnering with them to do that.
I'm hearing intentional from each one of you, right? Wendy, when you talk about COVID and what you all did, and Joan, what you did in your town, and BJ, when you talk about, you know, in January, evaluating what you did that past year, you used the word, Tiffany, intentional. And I think this is a good reminder that everything in our life, including our philanthropy, intentional is a word we need to hear. Wendy, how do you help philanthropists harness innovation or be willing to take risks? I heard a little bit of that.
It's a little hard. So, you know, I think we do some of the same things that BJ talked about. So we work with our fund. I'm going to talk about how we work with our fund holders. I mean, it's one thing with our fellow peer funders, because those of us who are grant makers for a living tend to be a little bit more risk-takey than I think some of others are. Because when it's your personal money, I think sometimes it's a little harder to think about risk. So we do something very similar where we actually work with our fund holders to actually do a values exercise, whether with them as individuals or as families, and really help them identify what it is their passion is, where do they want to give, what do they want out of it. And then we ask a lot of the same questions, Joan, that you guys do, which is like, what do you want to get out of this? What's the end game? And what are you then comfortable with? And then we can work with them to try to identify programs and projects that we think kind of tickle their fancy, but also maybe push the envelope a little bit that might be things that they don't understand, which is also to get to what you were saying, Tiffany. You know, to us, it's really important to listen to community and to understand what the actual outcomes are going to be, and to be really upfront with, if you're taking a grant, you're always, it's an investment. Like, you don't know if it's going to work. So it's not a guarantee that if we do this program that we're going to suddenly improve third grade reading or pull people out of poverty, but it's really important to make sure that we understand what the community is wanting and needing, what their solutions are, what they would like to see have happen, what outcomes, how they would measure success, and then help our fund holders, help our peer funders, and really, and even in some cases my trustees, understand why this risk is worth taking. Because we're going to learn a lot from it. And what I always tell my trustees is that even if something doesn't work as we thought it was, it's a hypothesis, right? You have a theory of change, that you're going to try something, you think it's going to work, and if it doesn't, sometimes what you learn from what you fail on is a lot better than if you constantly succeed. And so we know things that aren't working well. It isn't necessarily, we try to really be humble about it, say it's not a failure, we can learn more from it. But it helps us get smarter about the kinds of things that we want to do in the future, if that helps.
No, that's very helpful. I actually have a friend that is a grant officer at the John Templeton Foundation, and she says she wants to hear the mistakes.
Yeah.
She wants to hear, guess what, we didn't accomplish this yet. Don't turn in not turn in a grant report. Tell me this.
Yeah, and we also tell folks a lot of times, in a lot of the big issues, and I'm sure you see this with Stand Together, you got to play the long game.
Oh yeah.
Like, we make grants for a year, and then we wonder sometimes they didn't get because it takes time. And we're working with people in people's lives and communities didn't get the way they are in Bryan, Texas overnight, and they're not going to get better in a year. You've got to play the long game, and that means being willing to take risk to have things take a circuitous route to success. And sometimes what you end up finding happens is something you never even imagined, and it's better than what you thought.
And then Joan, you talked a little bit about the role of business in finding solutions at the local level. Has it been difficult in trying to get public-private partnerships across? What have been your successes?
So I think it would have been difficult had we not, again, built the social capital, right? Like I can't stress enough how important it is to do that work. Even if you don't know what you're going for later, the work that you do now to build your network and establish those relationships, it makes it possible to do whatever you may set yourself out to do later, because you can call for help. So I think because we had built the social capital, not just in Bryan, but with organizations across the state and across the country, we have been able to call on those organizations. So for example, at a local level, we opened an art gallery. The reason we opened an art gallery is because downtown Bryan was pursuing an art district, a cultural art district designation from the state, which would afford Bryan access to some marketing exposure for the state. So great investment if we could make it work, but Bryan didn't have a gallery. So we had a building. I love art. Didn't know anything about it, but I wanted to learn more. So I decided to do my homework, figure out what it takes to open an art gallery, and I called on the Texas Commission on the Arts because we knew the executive director, we called on the local arts council, we were able to get some funding to support the initial investment that was required and bring the players together because our community needed an art gallery. And so we started the gallery. And then we were able to come at it from a more strategic angle and focus on some educational aspects, bring in the National Science Foundation. Jose and I got involved in something called the Network for Science, Engineering, Art, and Design, which is an educational and sort of thought approach to solving problems. And so this idea of, okay, well, we wanted a cultural arts district grew into something more sustainable because we were able to add on elements that would afford the funding, right? All because we laid the groundwork early on in building the network and having the circle available to us to call upon to do the things we wanted to do for our community.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joan. I've been told that it is getting time to wrap this up. We've had a really great conversation here, but I would love to hear just something quick from each of you, maybe a sentence just telling, or two telling us, what can each of us in this room do? Me included, all of us. What can we do right now to be more responsive and entrepreneurial and innovative and intentional in our giving?
Oh, don't start with me. I need to think about that for a minute.
I'll go. One thing that you can do to be more creative is call someone that you want to learn from. You know, one of the things I found is people are really generous in this space with their time. It's actually sort of the opposite of business where people are competing. Everyone wants to partner and everyone wants to share what they've learned. So I would encourage you, if you're going to do one thing, if there's something you want to learn about or grow into or explore, to reach out and call someone that you admire in that space.
That's a great idea.
I can go next. I was going to say listen, but I think we've all talked about listening to communities. And so what I'd say is get a little bit uncomfortable, right? I think that one of the things that I've found is that there's such power in brokering uncommon allies to have conversations that can be a little bit challenging, right? If you're always just talking to the folks that agree with you, we're probably not working hard enough, right? And so I would encourage you to do that. I personally believe that kids serve as an amazing way to do that. If you talk with folks, connect, share stories about the kids you love, all of a sudden you can start talking about the kids in your community, not as abstract ideas, but what are we going to do about these actual children, right? And communities want to lean in. That's part of why we're all here. So have those conversations.
So I'll jump in and just say, you know, to have the conversations, you need to have the relationships first. And one of the things that Jose and I started doing probably 15 years ago now is we host in our home, just because we all have homes, right? We can do this. You can host people in your homes that maybe you don't know that well, share a meal and have a conversation, get to know them, and don't just host, like you said, don't put yourself in an echo chamber. Host people who are different than you, who have maybe different ideas or just different expertise. We started out doing this because we wanted to expose the students and interns in our business to people who are, you know, very knowledgeable, subject matter experts, and it's turned into, it's Wine Wednesday, because, you know, wine. and a good meal sparks all kinds of great conversation. But you get to know people who are different than you, who might have very different perspectives or even values than you do. But that lays the groundwork and builds the relational capacity to then have a hard conversation, but also to learn about things that you may not even know you have an interest in supporting, either with your time or your talent or your resources philanthropically. So I think really broadening the net of your network, like go broad and learn from other people.
And then Wendy?
I would just say everything that they said and echo, but I would say everyone can do something, even if it's small, and it doesn't have to be big things, but you can do something tiny, even if it's just sending a check or gathering cans out of your pantry. Everybody can do something, and don't be afraid to just do even a small thing.
Thank you so much, ladies. And everyone in the room, I'm going to actually give you an assignment. Do not feel uncomfortable or guilty. These are all people to talk to learn from, to give ideas to. Feel free afterwards to walk up to them and talk to them. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Great.
Thank you.